Kit Saves the Day, a Summer Story. Chapter 1. Stuck. Yahoo! Kit Kittredge whooped with joy. She flew into the kitchen, waving an envelope over her head. "Look, everybody!" she shouted. "It's from Charlie!" Kit's mother, dad, and Aunt Millie gathered around her eagerly. A letter from Charlie was always a treat. "Here, Dad," Kit said. "You read it." Mr. Kittredge dried his hands on the dish towel wrapped around his waist before he took the letter. It was a hot, sticky August afternoon, and the kitchen was steamy because the grown-ups were sterilizing glass jars in boiling water to prepare them for jams and preserves. "Dear folks," Dad read aloud. "I'm sitting on a patch of snow." "Snow!" exclaimed Kit enviously. "Shh!" shushed Mother and Aunt Millie. Dad continued. "On a mountaintop here in Glacier National Park. There's nothing but blue sky and pine trees around me. This week, we're working on a stone wall next to a road called Going to the Sun Highway. It's hard, but all of us fellows here are glad to have work to do. We have fun, too. I've told my baseball team that my kid sister Kit is the best catcher in Cincinnati. Well, break time's over. I'll write again soon. I miss you. I wish all of you could see how pretty Montana is. Love, Charlie." For a moment after Dad finished reading, everyone just stood there grinning. It was as if Charlie had sent a brisk mountain breeze in his letter, a breeze that blew all the way from Glacier Park to stir the stifling air in the kitchen, refresh everyone, and lift their spirits. Then Kit saw Mother and Dad exchange a wistful look. They miss Charlie, she thought. Kit knew how they felt. She too missed Charlie and his jokes, his big guffawing laugh, and the way he took stairs 2 at a time. Charlie had been far away in Montana since June. He was working for the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was a program started by President Roosevelt to provide jobs for young men who were out of work because of the Depression. "This is for you, Kit," said Dad. He handed Kit a photo of Charlie in a group of young men. They were in a forest, smiling broadly at the camera. Kit saw a note on the back. "Hey, Squirt," she read aloud. "I thought you'd like this photo of me and my CCC buddies. Write and tell me what you're up to. XO, Charlie." Kit rose on her toes in delight. She loved writing. "I'll go make one of my newspapers for Charlie right now," she announced. She slipped the photo into her pocket and took off flying toward the hall. "Kit?" said Mother. "Have you finished your chores?" Kit crash-landed to a stop. "No," she admitted, "but—" "Please do, dear," said Mother, "before you do anything else." Aunt Millie added, "And please give the chickens fresh water. They'll be thirsty on a hot day like today." Kit scowled, but none of the grown-ups noticed. They'd already turned back to their work. Clouds of steam rose from the pots on the stove, and the glass jars clinked and clanked in the boiling water. "Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble," said Aunt Millie cheerfully, wiping her foggy eyeglasses on her apron. Kit knew Aunt Millie was quoting the witches in a play by Shakespeare called Macbeth. Right now, Kit felt as low down as a mean witch. She let the screen door slam shut behind her and stalked over to the chicken pen. The chickens usually greeted her with energetic squawking, but today they were under a listless spell because of the heat. They ignored Kit and didn't bother to cluck their thanks when she filled their water pan. "I'm just a drudge," Kit grumbled to herself, feeling cross that even the chickens seemed to take her for granted. She picked up her broom and went back to work, beating the rug hung over the clothesline. Mop, sweep, scrub, polish, do the laundry, wash the dishes, feed the chickens, weed the garden. My chores never end. Dirt and dust billowed up off the rug and stuck to Kit's sweaty face and arms, so that she was soon as spotty as an old brown toad. She kicked off her sandals, which, like all of her clothes, were too small, but freeing her feet did not cheer her up. The more Kit thought about her situation, the crosser she became. She'd never have time to write a newspaper for Charlie. After beating the rug, she was supposed to help Dad clean out the gutters. After that, it would be time to help Mother cook and serve dinner. And after dinner, there would be dishes to wash, dry, and put away. There would be lots of dishes, too. 11 people lived in Kit's house. A year ago, Mr. Kittredge had lost his job because of the Depression, and Kit's family had turned their home into a boarding house to earn money. There were 7 boarders now, 2 nurses named Miss Hart and Miss Finney, a musician named Mr. Peck, an elderly couple named Mr. and Mrs. Bell, and a lady named Mrs. Howard and her son Sterling, who was exactly Kit's age. But even though the house was jam-packed with paying guests, and even though the Kittredges pinched every penny till it squealed, they still just eked out barely enough money to pay the bills month after month. It seemed to Kit that just like chores, the depression was never going to end. Kit whacked the rug harder than was strictly necessary. "Wow," said Sterling, crossing the yard toward Kit. "I wish your broom was a bat and the rug was a ball. That would have been a home run." "And that," Kit said grimly as she walloped the rug again, "is as close as I'll get to swinging a baseball bat this summer." Dust from the rug surrounded Sterling like a dirty cloud, but he didn't budge. He stood patiently, waiting for Kit to explain why she was so grumpy. Kit's dog Grace ambled over. Grace liked to be wherever a conversation was going on. She plunked herself down and drooled on Kit's kicked-off sandals. "We had a letter from Charlie," Kit said. "He sent me this." Kit took Charlie's photo out of her pocket and gave it to Sterling. "Read the back." Sterling did. Then he said, "Let's go make him a newspaper." "I can't," Kit exploded. "I have to do my dumb chores." Kit knew it was unfair to snap at Sterling. Chores weren't his fault. Besides, he worked hard too. At the beginning of the summer, he'd surprised everyone by up and getting himself a job selling newspapers on a street corner. Sterling still looked like a pipsqueak, but he acted sturdier and more sure of himself. Kit thought it was because he had a real job out in the world and was earning money, just like Charlie, who sent home 25 of the $30 he earned through the CCC every month. "Sorry you can't write a newspaper for Charlie," said Sterling. "Well, what would I write about anyway?" said Kit, putting the photo back in her pocket. "Dusting? The laundry? I'm not doing anything exciting. Charlie's the one who's having an adventure." Kit sighed and leaned on her broom. "The truth is," she admitted, "I'm jealous of Charlie." Lucky Charlie was living in a place where there were mountain peaks and hidden valleys, cool blue lakes and dark green pines, rushing streams and thundering waterfalls. By contrast, Kit's life was flat, colorless, and humdrum. "I wish I could have an adventure," she said. "I'm tired of doing the same old chores. I feel so bogged down, so stuck. I'd like to fly away and escape." "In that case," said Sterling, "I don't wish your broom was a baseball bat. I wish it was a witch's broom." Kit laughed in spite of herself. She straddled the broom and pretended to try and take off, but remained, of course, solidly planted on the ground. "I give up," she said. "Looks like my broom is stuck too." Kit slapped at a mosquito. Too late. Now there'd be a bite on her neck, which was already sunburned and itchy with sweat. It was a few days later. Kit was in the vegetable garden. moving slowly between rows of tomato plants and picking the ripest tomatoes off the vines. Aunt Millie had declared today Tomato Harvest Day. She'd decided that most of the tomatoes were ready to be preserved, and she did not want to waste one tomato, or 1 minute either. She had rousted everyone out of bed at dawn and hurried them to work. By now, it was mid-morning. Kit and Sterling were outside picking. Mother was in the kitchen stewing and preserving. Dad was carrying jars of preserved tomatoes to the basement. Aunt Millie buzzed back and forth, inside and outside, bossing both pickers and preservers. "We'll be glad for all this work come winter," she said happily. "Think of the money we'll save by eating food we've grown ourselves. And it'll remind us of summer. When we eat these tomatoes, we'll remember what Shakespeare calls summer's honey breath." Kit and Sterling smiled at each other through the tomato plants. They were used to the way Aunt Millie quoted Shakespeare. She'd been a teacher for many years, and she couldn't help teaching wherever she was. As usual, Aunt Millie and Shakespeare were right. The air did feel like honey, liquid, heavy, and sticky. Even so, Kit was grateful to be outdoors. The day before, she'd practically melted in the suffocating kitchen helping Aunt Millie make peach jam. Kit had stirred the thick pot of goo on the stove until her hand was glued to the spoon with peach juice, and her feet were pasted to the floor with jam. Today in the garden, there was at least a sluggish breeze rustling the limp leaves every so often. The tomatoes glowed red and were so plump they seemed about to burst with their smooth skins. Each one had a satisfying heft when Kit held it in her hand. Her basket was heavy when she stood up and carried it to Aunt Millie, who took it inside. Kit had knelt down and gone back to picking when Grace barked a friendly bark. Grace was supposed to be a guard dog, but she seemed to think that anyone who came to the house had only come to admire her, and therefore should be welcomed politely. Kit poked her head up above the tomatoes. "Hey," said someone. Kit turned and saw a stranger standing at the edge of the garden. It was a teenage boy in a dusty cap and stained, baggy, roughly patched trousers. "Hey yourself," Kit said. Now Sterling raised his head, too. The teenage boy grinned such a wide, big grin that Kit and Sterling had to smile back. Kit knew he was a hobo. He had the same scruffy, scrawny look as all the hobos and tramps who came to the house looking for a handout or a job to do in return for food. The boy bent down to scratch Grace's back. He nodded toward the garden. "The tomatoes look good," he said. Just then the screen door opened and Aunt Millie came out. The boy's grin disappeared. He shot up straight, pulled his cap off, and pushed his shaggy, dark hair out of his eyes. "How do, ma'am?" he said. His voice was respectful and a little wary. He sounded as if he half expected Aunt Millie to shoo him away. But Kit knew Aunt Millie would never shoo away a stray dog, much less a stray boy. "What can I do for you, son?" Aunt Millie asked. "Well, ma'am," said the boy, "I was just saying to the young lady yonder what a good crop of tomatoes you got. Your string beans are ready to be picked, too. I'd be glad to help. Looks like maybe you could use a hand." "Looks like maybe you could use a bite to eat," said Aunt Millie. "You're as skinny as a string bean yourself." The boy grinned his wide, wonderful grin. "I'd be obliged," he said, "but not until after our work." Aunt Millie smiled. "What's your name, son?" she asked. "William Shepherd," answered the boy, "but nowadays most folks call me Texas Will, or just plain Will." "All right, just plain Will," said Aunt Millie. She handed him an empty basket. "You can help Kit and Sterling with the picking. Mind, there won't be any pay in it for you, none but lunch, anyway." "That'll do fine, ma'am," said Will. He bent over a tomato plant and went straight to work. "I'll tell the folks inside there'll be one more for lunch," said Aunt Millie. She went back into the kitchen. Kit was burning with curiosity about Will. She had hundreds of questions to ask him. Also, she wanted to hear Will talk more. She liked the way he pronounced his name Wheel and called Aunt Millie ma'am. Are you from Texas? Kit asked. Yep, Will answered without stopping his work. How'd you get as far as Cincinnati? Sterling asked. Riding the rails mostly, said Will. Hopping freights. I ride freight trains for free by jumping into empty boxcars. Aren't you kind of young? Kit asked. To be a hobo, I mean. I'm 15, said Will. There are lots of hobos my age, some even younger. He glanced at Kit. Girls not much older than you ride the rails. They do? Kit asked, fascinated. Yep, said Will. Gosh, thought Kit. What a life that must be. Very exciting. And very unstuck. Chapter 2. Just Plain Will. Will was a quick, quiet worker. With his help, all the ripest tomatoes were picked by lunchtime. Mother brought a tray of sandwiches outside, and Dad brought a pitcher of milk so they could have lunch on the shady back porch. Will looked at the sandwiches as if he could devour them all. Kit knew how he felt. She was always hungry herself. Mother often teased that Kit was eating them out of house and home. But before they could eat, Aunt Millie brought out a basin of hot water, a bar of soap, and a hand towel. Wash up, children, she ordered Kit, Sterling, and Will. Kit and Sterling washed quickly, but Will pushed up his sleeves, plunged his hands into the hot water, and sighed with pleasure. He lathered up his hands, cupped them, and scooped up handful after handful of water to wash his face, letting the warm, soapy water run down his neck. Then he scrubbed his arms up to his elbows and dried off with the towel. Water drops glistened on his hair. Kit realized soap and hot water were luxuries hobos like Will probably didn't see often. You're a good worker, Will, said Aunt Millie as she filled his milk glass. You know what you're doing in a garden. I ought to, said Will with his winning grin. My family had a farm back in Texas. Don't you miss your family? Asked Mother. I do, ma'am, answered Will. And I miss the farm. It used to be beautiful. My father grew wheat. In the spring, the fields looked like a green ocean. Then hard times came. My father couldn't make any money selling his wheat. After that, it seemed like nature turned against us because it never rained. The wheat dried up, dead and brown. It cracked under your feet when you walked through the fields, and the soil was nothing but dust. Will sighed. A couple of big windstorms came and just blew the farm away, scattered it. My family's gone too. They packed up everything and left. How come you didn't go with them? Kit asked Will. Kit, Mother scolded gently. That's a personal question. It's all right, ma'am, said Will. He looked at Kit. See, my father is a proud man. It about killed him when he lost the farm and couldn't feed us any more. I knew he hated having me see him brought so low. And I knew I was just one more mouth he couldn't feed, one more pair of feet he couldn't buy shoes for. So when my family packed up to leave Texas, I made up my mind to go off on my own. I figured it was time for me to take care of myself. Kit understood. She felt guilty about her appetite and about growing so much and so fast that she was always needing bigger clothes and shoes, too. She felt like Alice in Wonderland, who suddenly grew so big she filled the house, except that Alice's clothes grew too, which was very convenient. Kit's arms and legs dangled out of most of her clothes as if she were a gangly daddy longlegs. Kit thought Will was brave and noble to have left his family so that he wasn't an expense to them anymore. Did you run away? Sterling asked. Yep, said Will. I've been most everywhere since then. I follow the crops. I went north to harvest potatoes in the fall, south to pick walnuts in the winter, and east to pick strawberries in the spring. Now I'm on my way west to Oregon for the apple harvest." Dad spoke, and Kit heard something that sounded like envy in his voice. "You've seen a lot of the country for someone your age," he said to Will. "Yes, sir, and met a lot of people, too," said Will. "But none kinder than you folks." He stood up and put his cap back on his head. "Thank you for the fine lunch. I'll be on my way now." Dad glanced at Mother and Aunt Millie. All three seemed to come to an agreement without saying a word. Kit was happy when she heard Dad say, "Just a minute, Will. We'll be up to our elbows picking and preserving tomorrow, too. We'd be glad to have your help if you'd like to stay. We can't pay you, but we can feed you and give you a place to sleep." "I'll give you a haircut, too," said Aunt Millie. "You look like you haven't had one since you left home." Will's grin lit his whole face. "Thanks," he said. "I'd like that. I'll stay." "Good," said Kit. "You can tell us about all the places you've been." At first, Will was shy at dinner, but he soon grew comfortable and talkative. All the boarders liked him. Mother beamed at him, and Aunt Millie gave him extra large portions of food. Dad, who was always interested in places he had never been, asked Kit to bring the atlas to the table. He opened the atlas to a map of the United States so that Will could show them where he was from in Texas and point out all the places he'd been before he came to Ohio. Kit found Glacier Park, Montana on the map and told Will about Charlie and the work he was doing there with the CCC. After dinner, Mr. Peck played his bass fiddle while Mrs. Bell played the piano, and Will taught them all how to dance the Texas two-step. "We haven't had that much fun since Charlie left," Kit said as she led Will outside, carrying a lantern, blankets, and a pillow. Will had chosen not to sleep in the house. "Where do you want these?" she asked. "In the garage or on the porch?" "I'll sleep on the ground," said Will. "I'm not used to a roof anymore. Makes me feel too closed in." "All right," said Kit. "Good night." "Good night," said Will. As Kit climbed up to her attic room, she thought that Will was wise to be outdoors. "It's so stuffy in here," she sighed, flopping onto her bed. Aunt Millie, who shared Kit's room, looked up from her book of Shakespeare's sonnets. "What can't be cured must be endured," she said. Kit fanned herself with her hand. "The house feels hot and crowded to me tonight," she complained. "It's getting on my nerves." "Anyone can get along in a palace, dear child," said Aunt Millie. "Living squashed together is a true test of character." Kit loved Aunt Millie, but sometimes she thought it would be nice to be alone. She clicked on her gooseneck lamp and opened her favorite book, Robin Hood and His Adventures, hoping that reading would soothe and absorb her as it usually did. But the imaginary adventures of Robin Hood and his merry men didn't interest her tonight. Instead, Kit found herself staring at the photo of Charlie and his CCC buddies, which she'd propped up in front of her lamp. Kit's thoughts flew far and wide, out into the velvety black night, to Montana where Charlie was, and to the faraway places Will had been. What she longed for was a real adventure of her own. The next day, Kit was hanging sheets on the clothesline. A hot, sultry wind lifted the sheets so that they fluttered like moist white wings around her. Aunt Millie had set up her open-air barber shop next to the clothesline. She'd cut Sterling's hair, and now she was at work on Will. "I appreciate this, ma'am," he said. "I don't meet barbers in the jungle." "What's the jungle?" asked Sterling. "That's what we hobos call our camps," explained Will. "A jungle is usually close to the railroad tracks. There's one here in Cincinnati near Union Station, right next to the river." "Do you cook over a campfire?" asked Kit dreamily. and tell stories about the places you've been, and sing songs, and sleep out under the stars? Well, Will began as if he were starting a long explanation. Then he seemed to change his mind. He answered simply, "Yep, I've seen some of those camps," Aunt Millie said, snipping through Will's thick hair with her sharp scissors. "They look mighty uncomfortable. Hot in summer, cold in winter, wet in the rain, and buggy to boot." "Maybe," said Kit, "but there'd be no rugs to beat or gutters to clean, and you could just come and go as you please. It sounds fine to me." Aunt Millie shook her head. "A wanderer's life is lonely and hard," she said. "I believe most people are good-hearted, but not everyone is kind to hobos." She untied the cloth she put around Will's shoulders and shook the hair off it. "You're done, just plain Will," she said, "and much improved, if I do say so myself." "Thank you, ma'am," said Will, as Aunt Millie went inside. Will stood and brushed off his pants. "I sure am glad I stopped here," he said to Kit and Sterling. "Why did you stop at our house?" asked Kit. "How'd you know we'd be nice?" "I saw a sign," said Will. "What sign?" asked Kit and Sterling together. "Come on," Will said, tilting his head toward the fence. "I'll show you." Kit and Sterling followed Will to the corner of the yard where the fence met the street. "Look," said Will. On the fence post, someone had drawn a sketch of a cat. "That sign means a kind-hearted woman lives here." "Oh!" exclaimed Kit, enchanted. "Are there other signs, too?" "Yep," said Will. "Lots of 'em. They're a secret code that we hobos use to tell each other what to expect in the places we go. Usually the sign is scratched on a fence or drawn on a building or sidewalk with chalk or coal." "Can you show us more?" asked Kit. "Sure," said Will. Sterling, who liked to draw, always had a pencil stub and a piece of scrap paper in his pocket. He gave the pencil and paper to Will now. Will drew one horizontal line. "One line means it's a doubtful place. Better not stop there," he said. He added 3 more lines and explained, "But 4 lines means that the lady of the house will give you food if you do chores." Will drew a circle with 2 arrows pointing out of it. "This means get out fast, and this," he drew a big V, "means pretend to be sick." "Why would you do that?" asked Sterling. "If you pretend to be sick, folks will help you and feed you," said Will. "But isn't it lying to fake an illness?" asked Kit. "I suppose it is," said Will. "But on the road, well, sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to survive." "Do you ever steal?" asked Kit. Will took a deep breath. "Let me ask you this," he said. "Say you work hard all morning, helping a farmer harvest potatoes, and at the end, he gives you 2 wormy potatoes for your labor. If you slip 2 more potatoes in your pocket without telling him, is it stealing?" Kit and Sterling didn't answer. "Hunger changes the rules somewhat," said Will. He drew a circle and a square and put a dot in the middle of each. "This is the sign you'd leave on the stingy farmer's fence post. It means a bad-tempered man lives there." Kit nudged Sterling. "I bet that sign is outside Uncle Hendric's house," she said. Kit's uncle lived downtown. He was well-to-do, very stingy, and often mean. "Signs aren't the only way hobos help each other," said Will. "When hobos ride into town on the train, we go to the jungle. Then we spread out and look for chores to do for food. Maybe I sweep out a store and the storekeeper gives me a couple of onions. I bring them back to the jungle and put them together with everyone else's food to make a hobo stew. See, onions alone aren't so great, but add 'em to a pot of stew and there's more food for all. And it tastes better, too." Hobo stew, said Kit, savoring the words. I wish I could try some. Will said his thank yous and goodbyes early that afternoon, explaining that he planned to spend the night in the jungle near Union Station and then hop a freight headed west the next day. Kit was very sorry to see him go. It's duller than ever around here, she griped to Sterling later, as they took the dry sheets off the clothesline and put them in the laundry basket. Will is the only interesting thing that's happened to us all summer. Sterling agreed. I liked hearing about the jungle and the hobos, he said. He patted his pocket where he kept his pencil stub and scrap paper. I liked the secret signs Will taught us, too. Didn't that hobo stew sound good? Asked Kit. All at once, she gasped. Oh no, she exclaimed. We didn't give Will anything for the stew. Kit and Sterling looked at each other in dismay. Then Kit had an idea. You know what? She said eagerly. I bet if we asked, Mother and Aunt Millie would give us some food. We could bring it down to the jungle near Union Station and give it to Will to put in the hobo stew. I don't, Sterling began doubtfully. Listen, Sterling, Kit interrupted. Remember that stingy farmer with the wormy potatoes Will told us about? Sterling nodded. Well, we're worse than that farmer if we don't give Will some of the tomatoes and beans he picked, said Kit. We owe Will some food for the stew. He worked hard helping us, didn't he? Sterling nodded again. Besides, aren't you dying to see the jungle? Said Kit. I am. She hoisted the laundry basket onto her hip and spoke with a mixture of determination and excitement. As soon as I finish my chores, I'll talk to the grown-ups, and then we'll go find Will. Chapter 3. The Hobo Jungle. No, Grace, Kit said. You can't come with us to the jungle. Stay. Grace sighed. She sank down, her ears puddling around her head and her droopy eyes looking sad. Kit was sorry, but Grace didn't move very fast on her short legs, and her splayed feet that pointed out like a duck's. And Kit was in a hurry. She and Sterling were just setting forth, and it was already late afternoon. Finishing her chores had taken longer than Kit had expected. Talking to the grown-ups had, too. Mrs. Howard said that the jungle was dangerous, probably full of thugs and murderers. But luckily, Aunt Millie had persuaded her that most hobos were just folks who were down on their luck, and that going to the jungle would be a generous, educational thing for Kit and Sterling to do. Mrs. Howard fussed, but she gave in after Sterling promised not to eat any of the hobo stew. Otherwise, she was sure he'd come down with some dreadful disease. Now finally, Kit and Sterling were on their way with a flour sack bag full of food that Aunt Millie had packed. There were fresh tomatoes and beans from the garden, a can of stewed tomatoes, and a can of milk. Kit's stomach was fluttery. She was an honest girl, and she admitted to herself that she wanted to bring food to the hobos, not just out of kindness, but also out of curiosity. The part of her that was a writer was always intrigued by new experiences. At last, she'd have something interesting to write in her newspaper for Charlie. She'd notice everything about the jungle, and no matter what Mrs. Howard said, she'd taste the hobo stew. It was not a long walk to Union Station from the Kittredge's house. Very shortly, Kit and Sterling passed the huge front of the train station. They continued past the rail yards to the riverbank underneath the trestle bridge. There, almost hidden in a little grove of trees and low bushes, was a cleared-out space of bare ground with a smoky fire in the middle of it. We're here, breathed Kit to Sterling. This is the jungle. Kit and Sterling looked around with wide eyes. Somehow, the jungle was not as comfortable looking as Kit had imagined. There were a few tumble-down shelters made of old boards leaning against the trees, and a few dirty tents that sagged tiredly. The people looked tired too. Some were washing their clothes in the river and spreading them on bushes to dry. One man was shaving, standing at a cracked mirror hung from a tree branch. But most of the hobos were stretched out on the ground, hard asleep, their hats covering their faces. Someone was playing a soft, haunting tune on a harmonica. The air smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and stew. Kit was glad to see Will coming toward her. "Hey," said Will. "Kit and Sterling, what are you doing here?" Kit took the food out of the sack. "We came to give you some of this food for the hobo stew," she said. "Sorry we forgot before." Will grinned. "Well, thanks," he said. Will used a sharp rock to open the cans. He lifted the lid from the pot, added the canned tomatoes and the fresh tomatoes and beans from the garden, stirred the stew, and gave Kit a taste. It was very spicy. In a moment, a woman came to the fire and filled 3 bowls from the pot. Kit was sadly surprised when she saw that the woman was bringing the stew to 3 very small, very hungry-looking children. One of the children was practically a baby. Will gave the young mother the can of milk. Then he looked at Kit's face. "What's the matter?" he said. Kit said slowly, "I didn't expect to see little kids here." Kit had assumed that hobos were people like Will, who'd chosen to live the adventurous life on the road. Now she understood that most of them were poor, lost people, families with tiny babies even, who had once been settled and respectable but now, because of the Depression, had no place to call home. Kit saw that the young mother's husband was asleep. He'd tied his shoes to his wrist. "Why did he do that?" Kit asked Will quietly. "He's afraid someone will steal his shoes while he's asleep," explained Will. "A hobo's shoes are his most valuable possession. Can't get anywhere without 'em. Men gamble for shoes, and fight for 'em, too." Kit looked around at the other hobos. They were wearing street shoes, tennis shoes, old rubber boots, shoes with pieces of tire nailed to the bottom, mismatched hiking boots, even rags wrapped around their feet and legs and tied on with rope. One boy had taken off a huge old pair of 4-buckle galoshes. He wore 2 pairs of socks, and he was stuffing crumpled newspaper into the toes of the galoshes to make them fit. Another man was repairing his boots, which were clearly too small for him. When Kit saw his feet, she was heartsick and a little ashamed of herself. The way her sandals pinched her toes was nothing compared to the way this poor man's feet were rubbed raw and bleeding. Kit's attention was suddenly distracted by a noisy group of men arriving in the jungle. They greeted the others and squatted down by the fire. "A freight train must have pulled in," Will explained to Kit and Sterling. One of the younger men looked up. "Well, if it isn't Texas Whale," he said, smirking. He pronounced Will wheel, making fun of Will's accent. "Hello, Lex," said Will. Kit could tell that Will did not like Lex. "Who's this?" Lex asked, pointing at Kit and Sterling. "They are friends of mine," said Will. "They live just north of here." "So, kids," Lex drawled, "I bet Will has told you all about me, his old friend Lex, and how I'm the world's best at hopping freights." Kit and Sterling shook their heads no. "He didn't?" said Lex, pretending to be surprised. "Well, come on, then. I'll show you how good I am." Lex stood up. "Better yet, I'll teach you how to hop a freight. What do you say?" "Leave 'em alone, Lex," said Will. But Lex ignored Will and spoke straight to Kit. "There's nothing to it," he said. "The train I just got off of is heading north. We'll hop it, Get off at the first stop, still within city limits. It'll be a ride toward home for you and your little buddy there." He tilted his head towards Sterling. Everyone was quiet, waiting to see what Kit would do. She knew Lex was a braggart and not to be trusted. But a chance to hop a freight train was a chance for a real adventure. "Lex is all talk, Kit," said Will. "Don't let him bamboozle you." Lex still spoke to Kit. "I'm not talking you into anything, am I, Missy?" he said in a wheedling voice. "You'd like to try it. I can tell by the look in your eyes that you're curious. Or maybe you're just afraid. Is that it? You scared?" "I am not," said Kit hotly. "I want to do it." "No, Kit," said Will. "Hopping freights is dangerous. It's against the—" But Kit was not listening. "You hop freights all the time," she cut in. "And you told me that lots of girls my age do it too. How dangerous can it be?" Kit lowered her voice and spoke earnestly. "Don't you see, Will?" she asked. "This is my one chance to do something exciting. I can't let it go by." She turned to Sterling. "Listen," she said, "you don't have to come." Sterling looked at Kit with his huge, pure gray eyes. "Yes, I do," he said. "Let's go, then," said Lex impatiently. "The train will be leaving soon." "This is a bad idea, Kit," said Will, frowning. "But if you're so set on it, I'm coming too. I've got to make sure you get home safely." Kit, Sterling, and a reluctant Will followed Lex along the riverbank, under the trestle bridge, and up a hill. They skirted the edge of the rail yard, making their way between huge freight cars and over a tangle of rails. Kit was soon so twisted around that she had no idea what direction she was headed in. At last, Lex stopped. He pointed to a red boxcar whose door was open. It was part of a train that was so long that Kit couldn't see the engine or the caboose. "We'll jump into that boxcar," Lex said, "but we have to wait until the train moves out of the rail yard before we do." Kit's heart beat fast with excitement while they were waiting for the train to move. Finally, with a slow hiss of steam, the train's wheels began to turn and the train chugged toward them, gathering speed. Lex ran along next to it with Kit, Sterling, and Will following him. Then Lex grabbed onto a metal ladder attached to the boxcar, and, in a move as smooth as a cat's, swung himself up and into the open door. He made it look easy. Kit and Sterling ran next to each other, staying even with the train. Then Sterling tripped. He started to fall forward, and then for one sickening second, Kit was afraid he'd be crushed under the wheels of the train. But Will caught him from behind, grabbed him by the scuff of his neck and the seat of his pants, and tossed him headfirst onto the train as if he were a sack of potatoes. Then Will swung himself up into the car, too. The train was moving faster and faster. Kit was a good runner, but she had to run with all her might to keep up with the red boxcar. Will knelt down in the open door of the boxcar and reached out his hand to Kit. "Grab my hand!" he shouted over the noise of the train. Kit put on a burst of speed. She stretched her arm out, reaching for Will's hand. At last she caught it. Will lifted her up so that she dangled, then swung her so she flew through the air into the boxcar. Kit thudded against the hard wooden floor as she landed. "Are you okay?" Will asked her. Kit was too out of breath to talk, so she just nodded. Eagerly, she scrambled to her feet and stood by the open door. The wind blew her hair every which way. Smoke stung her eyes, and cinders smudged her face, but she didn't care. Faster and faster the train rushed along the track, until the world outside was just a blur. Kit was exhilarated. She'd never moved so fast. She'd never felt so free. For a second, for a heartbeat, Kit wished the train would never stop. Then Sterling tugged on her arm. "Kit," he said urgently. Lex led us on the wrong train. We're not going north toward home. We're going south, across the river. Look. Kit stuck her head out. Sure enough, the train was barreling across the trestle bridge, the tracks spooling out behind it, the river flowing below. With every click of the wheels, Cincinnati grew smaller and home was further away. Kit whirled around. Lex! She shouted, searching for his face in the dimness of the boxcar. Did you trick us on purpose? Lex didn't answer because just then, the brakes slammed on and the train screeched to a stop. Kit held on tight to the door to keep from falling. She looked out to see where they were. The train had crossed the bridge. It was stopped in a wooded area where a dirt road crossed the railroad tracks. Kit saw lots of men coming toward the train. This is trouble, muttered Lex. He knocked Kit out of the way, leaped out of the boxcar, and disappeared into the trees. Will held a finger to his lips and gestured for Kit and Sterling to stand up and press themselves against the wall behind them. Outside, Kit heard angry voices and the sound of fists and sticks pounding on the boxcars. Will, Kit whispered. What's happening? The train's been stopped by railroad bulls, answered Will. Bulls are men the railroad hires to throw hobos off the trains. He pulled off his cap. Put this on, he said to Kit. I don't want them to know you're a girl. Why? Kit started to ask, but suddenly she was blinded by a flashlight aimed straight into her eyes. Will and Sterling froze in the light too. All right, growled a harsh voice. Are you bums gonna come out by yourselves, or do I have to come in there and toss you out like trash? Come on, ordered another voice. Out! Will jumped out of the boxcar. He turned to help Kit and Sterling, but one of the railroad bulls shoved him aside, grasped the two smaller children each by an arm, and jerked them out so roughly that they fell onto the dusty, rocky ground. Kit stood. She tried to brush the dirt off of her overalls, but it just smeared. She wiped her hands on the seat of her pants. Outside the boxcar was a scene of scary confusion. Railroad bulls swarmed over the train, hauling hobos out of the boxcars, shouting and pushing the hobos into a double line. The railroad bulls carried stout sticks and bats. Some even had guns. Sterling stood right next to Kit, and Will stood in front of them, trying to shield them as best he could from the bulls. But it was no use. One of the bulls rapped Kit sharply on the back of her legs with his club. Line up, you bum, the bull ordered. Kit spoke fiercely. I'm not a bum, she said. Ha! Scoffed the man. He eyed Kit's filthy overalls, dirty hands, and sooty face. You look like a bum to me. Get in line, be quick about it. He pushed Kit into line between Sterling and Will. Where are they taking us? Kit asked Will as they walked forward. To town, said Will. Keep my hat on your head. Hide your hair. If they see that you're a girl, they'll separate us at the jail. Jail? Gasped Kit. Why are we going to jail? We didn't do anything wrong. We're not criminals. Hopping a freight is against the law, said Will. I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. And they put us in jail so that we won't beg or panhandle in their town. We'll spend the night in a cell. In the morning, they'll put us on a truck and drive us out of town. Spend the night in jail? Thought Kit miserably. She looked behind her to see if there was any way to escape. But the double line of hobos, about 20 in all, was closely guarded by bulls on all sides. The pitiful parade left the woods and entered a town called Spencerville. As the hobos passed, the townspeople stared and frowned at them with dislike and distrust. The jail was a squat brick building that faced the town square. Its walls were thick, and its front windows had bars. Kit and the others were herded inside. Turn your pockets inside out, the sheriff ordered them. Kit and Will had empty pockets, and the sheriff let Sterling keep his scrap of paper and pencil stub. Then the hobos were crowded into a small square room. It had a concrete floor and one tiny window, but no furniture. The hobos filed in silently and sat on the hard floor, or slouched tiredly against the walls. Kit stood close to Will and Sterling. The wall was cold against her back. Tears pricked her eyes as she watched the door swing shut and heard it lock with a hollow, horrifying clang. Chapter 4. Do Something. Kit shivered. "Don't be afraid," said Will softly. "I'm not," said Kit, though she was. "I'm mad. We've got to get out of here. We've got to do something." Sterling gave her an earnest look, but said nothing. Soon there was a loud rattle and clatter in the hall. The door opened and the sheriff announced, "Dinner." All the hobos stood and formed a line. They were each given a mug of water and a tin plate with a cold boiled potato, a spoonful of beans, and a slice of soggy, moldy bread. Though Kit was hungry, she had to force herself to eat. The food smelled sour. It stuck in her throat so that she had to wash it down with the rusty-tasting water. After dinner, the sheriff brought wash basins of cold water, bars of hard soap, and newspapers for towels for the hobos to use to wash up. Kit gathered her courage and went to the sheriff. "Please, sir," she said, "there's been a mistake. My friends and I aren't hobos. My parents don't have a phone, but please let me call my Uncle Hendrik back in Cincinnati. He'll tell my parents and they'll come get us." The sheriff crossed his arms over his chest. "If you have relatives in Cincinnati," he said, "what were you doing on the train, you bums? Always making up stories like you've got an uncle who'll help you." He shook his head. "You think I believe that lie?" "Please let me phone," said Kit. "You'll see I'm telling the truth." "Huh," the sheriff snorted. "Where's your money for the call?" "Well," said Kit, "I don't have any money, but—" "Of course you don't," interrupted the sheriff. He laughed a mean laugh. "Nice try, boy. You're a good panhandler. But I've seen too many of you beggars to fall for your tricks. Where would I be if I let every tramp who asked me make a free phone call? In the poorhouse, that's where." Kit stamped her foot. "I'm not a beggar," she said. "That's enough, boy," said the sheriff. "Don't you get sassy. And take your hat off when you're speaking to me." Before Kit could stop him, he snatched Will's cap off her head. "Look at you," he snarled as he tossed the cap at her. "A girl. I knew you were a liar. Come with me. I'm going to put you in a separate cell." "No!" said Kit furiously. She did not want to be separated from Will and Sterling. She struggled against the sheriff, but he was too strong for her. He held her tightly by the arm and pulled her along behind him. Just before she passed through the door, Sterling yanked hard on her sleeve. Kit looked at him. He held up his scrap of paper, and on it, Kit saw that he'd drawn a V. Kit knew it was one of the hobo signs. But which one? She thought frantically. What does it mean? Suddenly she remembered. Kit bent forward and grabbed her stomach with her free hand. "Oh," she groaned. She tugged on the sheriff's arm and slumped against the wall. "Oh, my stomach. Please, sir, I feel sick." It wasn't a lie. The dinner was churning in her queasy stomach. Kit groaned again and held her hand over her mouth. "Please let me go to the bathroom." "Oh, all right," barked the sheriff, exasperated. He pointed. "In there." Kit skittered into the bathroom. The second the door was closed behind her, she looked around wildly, thinking, "Is there a way out? Oh, there has to be." Then, high up the wall, she saw a little window. It was much too small for a grown person to fit through, but bang, bang! The sheriff hammered on the door, growling, "Hurry up!" "Yes, sir," Kit answered. Silently, carefully, she climbed up on the sink and opened the window. She poked her head and shoulders out, hoisted herself up, and slithered through, landing hard on the ground below. Kit scrambled to her feet. She leaned against the wall of the jail and allowed herself one shaky breath. Then she took off running. There was not a moment to lose. The sheriff would soon realize that she was gone. "Oh, please don't let anyone see me," she prayed as she ran. But Kit had only gone a few yards when she heard, "Hey, you! Stop!" She looked over her shoulder. Men outside the jail had spotted her and were chasing after her, shouting, "Come back, you!" Kit ran as fast as she could, trying desperately to get away from the footsteps she could hear close behind her. A rough hand grabbed her shoulder. "Gotcha!" a man panted. "No!" shrieked Kit. She wrenched her shoulder out of his grasp. The man lost his balance and fell behind her with a heavy thud. This time Kit didn't look back. She ran for all she was worth, pelting down the dirt road out of Spencerville toward the railroad tracks. "Home," she thought. "I've got to get home and get help for Sterling and Will." On and on Kit ran. Finally, up ahead, she saw the railroad tracks, shining silver, sharp as lightning in the darkness. She trotted next to them a short distance. Then she stopped dead. Oh no, she thought. Below her was the river, and looming above her was the railroad trestle bridge. It wasn't a solid bridge with a road on it. Instead, it was made of crisscross metal girders that looked like the strands of a gigantic spiderweb spun across the river. The train tracks that crossed the bridge were supported by wooden railroad ties with big gaps between them. "How will I ever cross this bridge?" Kit worried. Jump from tie to tie? Balance on a rail as if it were a tightrope? If only there were another way to cross the river. If only there were another way home. But Kit had no choice. Slowly, she walked toward the bridge. She saw that there was a narrow catwalk, 2 boards wide, that ran along the train tracks. Kit took a deep breath. Gingerly, she put one foot on the catwalk to see if it would hold her weight. It did, so she eased her other foot onto it too. The catwalk boards were spattered with oil, which made them slippery. Kit stood up straight, holding her arms out for balance. She tried not to look down. She tried not to hear the rushing river below. She knew that if she slipped, she might fall between the girders, and the river would sweep her away. Very cautiously, she slid one foot forward, then the other. "I can do it," she said to herself. "I can cross this bridge. I have to." Clouds covered the moon, making it so Kit couldn't see far ahead. The bridge seemed to disappear into nothingness. All Kit could do was put one foot slowly, carefully, fearfully in front of the other and walk forward. The boards of the catwalk were uneven, and Kit stubbed her toe and stumbled, almost falling. "Just walk," she urged herself. "Keep going." Step by scary step, Kit inched her way along the catwalk until she was in the middle of the bridge. "I'm halfway across now," she realized. "There's no turning back." Suddenly, the boards began to tremble under her feet. An eerie, mournful whistle pierced the air. It seemed to cut right through Kit. "Oh no!" she shrieked. A train was coming straight toward her, and there was nowhere to go. "I'm trapped," thought Kit. Desperately, Kit did the only thing she could. She flung herself down on her stomach and stretched herself flat against the catwalk. She held onto the boards with both hands, pressed her face into the splintery, oily wood, and closed her eyes. With a howling whoosh, the train pushed the air in front of it. With a monstrous force, it shook the bridge violently. With a deafening roar, it thundered past, just a few feet from Kit. She could feel its hot, fiery breath on her back. Beneath her, the boards rattled and bounced, as if trying to toss her off into the water below. Kit held on for dear life. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the train was gone, screaming into the dark. For a moment, Kit couldn't move. Then she spoke to herself sternly. Get up. Get up and go. Slowly, she lifted her face. Her fingers had gripped the boards so tightly that they ached when she let go. She pushed herself onto her knees and shakily she stood. On wobbly legs, she made herself take one step forward, then another, and then another. I've got to get home, she told herself over and over again. I've got to get help for Sterling and Will. The bridge in the darkness seemed endless, but after a very long, weary time, Kit blinked. Are those lights? She wondered, squinting at pinpoints that danced ahead of her. It's the city, she realized. Kit longed to quicken her steps, but she knew that would be dangerous. She had to hold herself back, force herself to walk slowly and carefully, until at last her feet were on solid ground and the bridge was behind her. Kit was so relieved that she wanted to collapse, but she couldn't allow herself to stop. She pushed on past the rail yards, past Union Station, and through the city streets. The short, easy route she and Sterling had traveled on their way to the Hobo's Jungle earlier that day felt long and difficult going the other way now. Kit was so footsore and tired that it took all her strength to put one foot in front of the other. As she trudged up the last hill to home, Kit's heart dragged as much as her feet. Why did I hop that freight? She thought. How could I have been so stupid? Desperate as she was to get home, Kit dreaded facing Mother, Dad, Aunt Millie, and Sterling's mother. They'll be so angry, she thought. When at last Kit saw her house ahead of her, she broke into a run, and hot tears spilled out of her eyes. Dad! Mother! She called out, wiping the tears from her cheeks. The front door opened and a yellow light poured out across the lawn. Dad, Mother, Aunt Millie, and Mrs. Howard rushed outside together, and Dad ran forward to catch Kit in his arms. Where have you been? He asked. Are you all right? Mr. Peck went down to the jungle to find you. We've been frantic. What's happened? Where's Sterling? Asked Mrs. Howard. For a moment, Kit didn't try to answer. She buried her face in Dad's chest and held on tight. She knew that all her whole life long she would never forget this feeling. This wonderful feeling of being home and safe at last. Then she pulled away from Dad. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault, she sputtered. I wanted an adventure and I didn't stop to think. She stopped and swallowed hard. Will and Sterling are across the river, she said. In Spencerville. They're in jail. What? Gasped all the grown-ups, bewildered. Mrs. Howard held on to Mother as if she were going to faint. As swiftly as she could, Kit told the whole story. She told how she'd been so stubbornly set on having an adventure that she'd hopped the freight even though Will tried to talk her out of it. She described being rounded up by the railroad bulls and marched to jail. She told how Sterling scribbled the secret sign and how she escaped, crossed the trestle bridge, and made her way home. Then she turned her dirt and tear-streaked face to Dad. We've got to go to Spencerville and rescue Will and Sterling right now, she pleaded. We've got to get them out of that jail. Dad nodded. We'll take Mr. and Mrs. Bell's car, he said. Come on. When they got out of the car in Spencerville and walked into the jail, Kit held tightly to Dad's hand. She stood very close, hidden behind him, while he talked to the sheriff about letting Will and Sterling go. Go ahead and take these boys, the sheriff said as he released Will and Sterling. We don't like their sort around here. Will and Sterling hurried toward Dad with grateful expressions. All three turned toward the door, but Kit held back. She stepped fully into the light so that the sheriff could see her clearly. You! Exclaimed the sheriff. You should be ashamed of yourself. Kit looked the sheriff straight in the eyes and spoke in a level voice. Sir, she said, I think you should be ashamed. Hopping freight trains is against the law, said the sheriff. It's my job to keep bums off trains. You don't have to be so mean about it, said Kit. The hobos haven't hurt anybody. They're just poor. There's no reason to treat them so badly. It isn't right, and it isn't fair. The sheriff glowered but said nothing. Come along, Kit, said Dad softly. It's time to go home. Kit followed Sterling, Will, and Dad to the car. Sterling climbed into the back seat, and Kit sat next to him, leaving room for Will to sit in the front. But Will didn't get into the car. Kit poked her head out. Aren't you coming, Will? She asked. Will shook his head. No, he said. Thanks, but it's time for me to head west to Oregon. I don't want to miss getting a job during the apple harvest. Is Montana on your way? Asked Kit. I reckon so, said Will. I'll stop by and say hey to Charlie for you. Will shook Dad's hand. Goodbye, sir, he said. Thanks for everything. Then he smiled his wide, heartwarming grin at Kit and Sterling. Goodbye, you two, he said. This time, Kit and Sterling could not smile back. Goodbye, Will, they said. Sterling's voice was low in the darkness, and Kit's voice was sorrowful. She was weighted down with worry, now that she knew how hard Will's life really was. Dad started the car, and Kit knelt on the seat and looked out the back window to wave goodbye to Will. But he had already turned away. He was walking west. Scrubbed clean and in their bathrobes, Kit and Sterling sat in the kitchen table. As soon as they'd arrived home, Mother had told them to take baths, then report to the kitchen. Now an unsmiling Aunt Millie poured them tall glasses of cold milk and put plates of hot buttered toast in front of them. Mother spoke first. We are very glad you're safe, children, she said. We were worried sick about you, exclaimed Mrs. Howard. We're sorry, said Kit. But Dad held his hand up to stop her. I understand how it feels to want an adventure, he said. Sometimes I think the toughest thing about this depression is enduring it, day after day. But I hope you two understand that what you did was foolish and dangerous. You used poor judgment, and you're lucky you didn't have to pay for it more dearly than you did. I think I speak for Mrs. Howard and Mother and Aunt Millie when I say that we are disappointed in you. We need to trust you to be more sensible in the future. Do you understand? Kit and Sterling nodded. They both looked ashamed. Well, said Aunt Millie briskly, thank goodness it's all over now. And as Shakespeare says, all's well that ends well. Kit managed a weak smile, but as she went up the stairs to her room, with Mother's gentle arm around her, Kit thought that perhaps this time Shakespeare and Aunt Millie were not right. Kit thought of Will and all the hardship that was before him. She thought of the hungry children she'd seen eating the hobo stew. She thought of the poor, tired hobos gathered around their fire in the jungle, resting their weary, hurt feet. She thought of the hobos crowded so roughly into the terrible jail. For them, all was not ended, and surely all was not well. After Mother kissed her goodnight, Kit lay awake thinking, "Everyone should see what I saw today," she thought. "Hobos have a hard life. People should know that. Someone should tell them. Someone should do something. Maybe I could."